the main stuff that I wanted to cover. I did want to touch on something that we ran into this morning, which was that things were updating when we kind of expected that they wouldn't. And what I realized is that the reason why they're updating is because we were not providing empty values for those specific attributes. So if we were to provide, say, an empty title, as long as we were providing a title and it was empty, it should block us out. So let's try to do that and make sure that that's working as expected.
So we had a title, but then if you provided like empty string, then it'll give a validation error.
Yeah, exactly. So here I've got, for instance, I know that this ID exists in my database, and I'm going to make a put request to it, but I'm providing an empty title here. Okay?
Because that was not default, right?
So, yeah, exactly. Title did not have a default, and it was required. So let's try sending the request. And you see we do, in fact, get a validation error.
So the app should always send that, right? So that's just a null foreign post many plus, essentially?
Yeah, so theoretically, your front-end app is going to be sending some information for the title field.
So that would essentially, that's we can create the request properly.
Right.
In practice with the app, it should send that field, and then
yeah, and if we wanted to be super hardcore about what we're blocking and what we're not, we could come in here inside the task controller, and we could say on the update. So let's say the body did not create it or did not have a title associated with it. We could just create a new object and then just say, for instance, let's just say title was req.body.title. We need to be a little bit more verbose with it, but then we'll just say description is the same thing. Description. And then complete is req.body.complete. Okay, so this time we're actually providing, so let's say I send a request and I don't include a title. What do you think? What is the title going to be equal to at that point? In this object. Undefined, right? So let's try to do that. So this time we'll come back here, and then I'll just take out the title line completely. And this time we get a validation error because we were trying to send through undefined for the title.
Does it say somewhere it's undefined, or it just says it's required?
Well, we can console log it out if you want proof of that. So if I come up in here inside my update method and I just said console.log, oops, req.body.title, that should be undefined. So just hit that request again, and then you see it's undefined in there. Because we didn't send it through at all, and when I was making this request, you see how I just left it out completely? So that's why it's undefined.
Can you go over again what happens if we don't, if it's just pulling from req.body?
Right.
Why it doesn't trigger that? Like, what is it doing instead?
Because instead what it's doing is it's taking the entire req.body object and only trying to alter those fields.
Okay.
But since that object did not even have a key value pair for title, yeah, it just ignores it.
Okay. And then that doesn't trigger your validation.
So that's why the validations were being skipped over.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So that was the thing that I wanted to touch on from this morning. The first thing that I wanted to cover this afternoon was this concept of middleware that we've been talking about a little bit. Does anyone have a kind of a good definition or an idea of what middleware is?
It's software between two services. But not a great definition.
Yeah, no, actually that's not too bad. So specifically when we're talking about express middleware, we're talking about something that rests in between the request and the response. Okay? So what I thought would be kind of fun to do would be to try to recreate, you know how we've been using the express.static method so that we can read from static files from directories? We could try to recreate that just using very simple middleware. Okay, so basically what middleware is just going to be a function. We can write a function that would then go see, does this file exist? And then if it does, let's give it back to the browser. Okay. So what I've done is I've created a client directory here and a static folder inside that, and then inside that I've just got this something called thisfile.txt, just some text, right? Nothing magic going on here. And then what we'll do is we'll create this middleware up here towards the top of our application that will run on every request. And it will basically try to see, do we have this file somewhere inside of our static directory? And then if we do, let's just give it back. What are we going to do if we don't? Does anyone know?
Just gonna do the routes.
Exactly, yeah. We're just going to hand it on down to the next handler in the list. Okay? So what we're going to use is the FS module, which we've seen kind of here and there. So I'm just going to require FS. And then up here, right after I create my app, I'm going to say app.use, and then I'm going to create this middleware function. Okay? The middleware can take the request and the response, and it can also take this thing called next. Next is a function that when we call next, it will actually send the request to the next request handler in sort of our chain of handlers. Okay? So the reason why we want that, again, is because what happens when we don't have that specific file? We want to just give the request down to the next handler. Okay?
It wouldn't do that by default, you have to specify that?
If we're writing our own middleware, yeah. Yeah, so if we don't call next, actually the request will just be hanging in air.
Gotcha.
Like
So
basically
you want
nothing will go back to the client. Yeah. All right, so what we want to do is let's just create a file path. So let's look for where we think this file may be. Okay? So I'll just say file path. And I'm going to say dir name, which is our current directory. And then I'm going to attach to it this directory that I created up here. So client static. And then the other thing I want to append to it is the actual, the whole path of my URL. Okay? So I'm going to tap into this thing called path that's available on the request object. And that's just everything from the, say in our case, localhost 3000, everything beyond that. Okay? So we'll say that's our file path. And then what I want to do is I want to try to read the file at this file path and see if it's there. So I can say fs.readFile, and then I can pass in the file path that I just laid out there. And then notice what this thing takes. So the first callback that it takes is an error callback. So if we don't have that file in that location, we would expect the error callback to run, right? Because it's not there. So again, if it's not there, what we're going to do is we're simply going to call next. Okay? Now if it is there, I just want to send that back to the client and be done with the whole request, right? So if it is there, I'm going to have a reference to a file. And then I can say res.send file. And then notice here what send file takes is it takes a path. Okay? So I can just provide the same path that I had there, file path. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about what we're doing here before I sort of show it in the browser what we get? A lot of blank looks. Questions, guys, come on.
So, I'm just gonna ask them all.
Good. Go ahead.
So anytime you write this app.use, it's like this is middleware, right? Like all of those, like the app.use express, like they're all middleware.
This is
They get
middleware.
run every time the app gets run. They get like those functions get ran.
So for every request that comes into our application, we're going to use this specific middleware. Now, if we terminate the request inside this middleware, we'll never get to the other handlers that fall below it because we finish it. So, for instance, like when we send back our file, that request response cycle is completely finished. So we would never get down here. You see where we're requiring our routes on line 17? We'd never get there if we had already sent back a file. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so if I go here to the browser and I try to just load up this file, notice how I'm getting some text. This was the exact file that we had in there, right? And I could add another one too, just for demonstration purposes. So inside of our static folder, let's just create another file. And I'll call this another file.html. Just put some stuff in here. H1, hello. Oops. Okay, and then we'll go back here and go another file.html. Okay, so that's how we can send back just a straight HTML file if we want. Now notice that this doesn't completely replace express.static, because there's one other thing that express.static will do is it will check to see if I'm looking for a specific path, it will check to see, do I just have an index.html at that specific path? So that would be the additional thing that express.static is giving us. Okay? But the thing I just wanted to show you guys is that you can very easily write your own middleware that would tap into this request and response and also next. There's another kind of middleware that you can write that has 4 things in it. So it has the request, the response, next, and error, and that would be an error handler. So that would run if something had generated an error in your application. Okay?
This is like mostly on the client side, like on the client or the back end too, like the front end. It only happens in the front end, or
Well, it's really happening on both ends. So the part that's happening on the back end is once the request has been made, and we check the path to see, what is the path, and then we go and look inside that static directory to see, does this file exist? And if it does, we're just going to pass it back to the client. So that's the part that happens at the front end. Once the client gets the file we gave it back, the client's going to present it on the screen, right? Okay. Any other questions about middleware and sort of how it works with Express?
and what if like you could put it all the way in the bottom after the required path? Will that still work the same way? Yeah, below that.
If we put it after 17?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, now what would happen is that our routes are going to be checked first. And then we won't get to our static handling until we've already bypassed all the routes. So if I find a route that matches inside what we've required on line 17, and then I finish the request response cycle in there, then I'll never get to my static handling, right? However, if I pass through all of my routes that are on line 17, then it will again run my static file middleware up here. So if I move this down there where you're talking about underneath line 17, it would then only run once I've passed through all of my other routes. Okay? And this kind of is a nice point to segue into the other thing that I wanted to talk about, which was the ordering of your routes and the ordering of different things that we're requiring. Because I've seen this trip up a lot of people, and I think it's a pretty important point to make. So let's come down here where we've got app.useExpress.json. So I'm just going to try to kind of break our app in some different ways, and we'll work to understand why it's breaking. Okay. What if I move this app.use down here underneath that? What do you guys think will happen then? Say that again. It's not going to break our app, but it's going to break some functionality. What do you think might be broken here?
All response
responses.
will be undefined.
Not the responses, the req.body, right? Because what this middleware is doing. So again, this is middleware that we have when we're app.using express.json. What the middleware is doing is it's giving us access to the JSON body of a request. So if we don't run this until after we've hit all of our routes, well, when we try to run the functionality inside of our routes, it's not going to have access to req.body, right? And we can prove that if we go here. So if I save this, and then inside our tasks controller, let's go to the create method, and let's just console, oops, I need to be inside there. Let's just console log req.body. Okay, and now I'll try to send some stuff to our create method. So again, we'll just do a post to tasks. Hang on a second, our middleware is kind of getting in the way here. Let me get rid of this real quick. All right, so let's try that again. We're going to send a request here. We got this empty object because obviously nothing was created, right? So undefined. So if you guys get into the situation where you're sending these requests to your server and nothing's happening or whatever, or maybe you're getting back an update object and it looked exactly the same as the thing before it, nothing changed at all, right? Try logging req.body and see if you have access to it. Make sure that you do. If you don't, then chances are very good that you've probably only started using the express.json below where your routes are. Or you simply you're not using it at all. So if you're not using it at all, then of course you wouldn't have the access to req.body.
And that's the req.body of the client to Express, or Express to Mongo, because those are two separate request segments, right?
Yeah, it's from the client to your backend.
It's the client
The first
to
thing that you said. Yeah, exactly.
And then are headers used at all in this, or it's essentially everything's running off the body of the request?
Yeah, you would use headers if you wanted to have more information, like authentication in there or something like that. But if we're just simply making a regular request, we're taking the information from the body. Yeah. So that's what happens if this gets moved to the wrong spot. Let me move that back up where it belongs. Okay. Another thing that could potentially trip you up is the ordering of the routes themselves. So let's take a quick look at that. So here I've got all of our basic routes. What if we had another route? Now we're not really going to have a route like this for our API, but what if we had a route called, so we've got a route to get a task, right? What if I had a route app.get new? What do you guys think is going to happen here if I create some kind of a function to handle that, right? So let's just say got a request, a response, I don't know, res.json, some var.
It's a bit effect, right? Because it's a completely different route.
So what happens if I send a request to this route?
Would it be able to tell the difference between that and the one above it?
You tell me.
No.
I don't think so.
No, what if
So which one's going to be activated? That's the
First one.
question. First one, right?
Yeah, task controller get by ID, that would go through.
Very good. Yeah, so the problem that we're going to have here is that it's going to run this route, and then what's going to happen when we try to find the new ID? Does that even exist? No.
But what if you do like
Highly unlikely, right?
after the new instead of req res, what if you do like task controller dot new? Then what would that matter?
You mean here on line 5?
Yeah, on line 5 instead of creating all that, if you just write their task controller.
Okay, fine. Let's do that. It won't make any difference, but that's fine. Let's do that because that's probably better practice, right? We'll just say new, and then here inside my tasks, let's just create our new method, right? So it takes in a request and response, and then I'm just going to do res.json sum var. Okay, so back here, whoops, I guess I forgot a comma again. Okay, so now we've saved that. Okay, so again, the question is, if I hit a request to this, a get request to this route, which one of these guys is going to run? Line 4 or line 5? How many people think line 5 is going to run?
Only if you hit 2 like API and task, not the
Yeah, but they're separate URL.
That's
What's the
that's
issue? I mean, what's the issue? You hit ID first. It's going to be ID before.
Well, I'm not seeing any hands yet, so I have no idea what anyone thinks. Who thinks that line 5 is going to run?
No, line 5, I'm sorry. Line 4
So-
will
so
run.
again,
4 will run,
if-
sorry. 4 will
If
run.
I hit this route, who thinks that line 5 is going to handle that? You do. You're the only one?
I think so.
Really?
It's because 4, from my understanding, 4, the last part is a variable. And it, like, am I wrong?
No.
Okay. Like, it's like,
No.
it's gonna look for anything, right? And then it's just gonna try and get to anything. Like, that could contain new.
It's a wild card.
Yeah, so like
Exactly.
if you typed in new, it's not going to know the difference between that and the other one. It'll just go to the first new. Which is
Precisely.
the first
Oh,
line.
you're assuming ID equals.
Well, could it equal anything?
No, the fact that we're
That's what
using
it
this
is.
colon ID means that it's now a wildcard param, which means that if I have some get route that has /API /task and then / some string, like could be anything really, then we're going to get up in here, right? We're not going to get down in here because this is already going to handle the request. So this won't even get a chance to do its job at all.
I see.
Do we have anything like regex or the $sign like we did in Django?
Yes, you can use regex, and the way that you would do it is you just put it in parentheses after your routing param.
Awesome.
After every route.
No, I'm not. You're not going to need to do it for the kinds of stuff we're doing. I'm just saying, like, if you had a very specific pattern that you wanted to check for, you could use regex to do it. But in our case, as long as we order these things in such a way that they get run the way that we want, you're not really going to need to worry about it. But that's why I wanted to talk about this, so that just in case this error comes up, because probably some people are going to hit it.
Or can we just
Pretty
like
likely.
completely change the route naming to a whole different thing and it won't be a problem? Or
Just push wildcards to the bottom.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, that's probably the best idea is to push the wildcards to the bottom. Obviously, you can make some changes to how you're naming your routes, but we wanted this to sort of follow RESTful conventions. Okay, so like this is the specific resource that we're looking for, right? And then we have our routes that have a specific ID, so that's a specific one that we're looking for. And then this one here, if we're just going API /task, that means we want all the tasks, right? Or if we do a post request to API /task, that means we just want to create a new one.
and is this only important for? I mean, not only, but is this like mostly for API purposes or like in any general?
Well, this would essentially apply for any Express application. So even if you were writing one in EJS, in fact, it would probably be more important in EJS. Because in EJS, we only have 2 different types of requests we can do, right? We've got get and post, that's it. So if we had our get and post requests conflicting, like especially the get requests, we could have an issue. So if we had one route where it was like task/ID and another route where it was task/new, again, which one's going to run first? That's why you have to be careful about that. So if we put this down here, or I'm sorry, this one underneath, then we can be sure that new will be caught if that's the one that we wanted to run.
And the wildcard only gets picked up if there's one character after the slash, not if it's blank, so to speak.
Yeah, that wouldn't be picked up if it was completely
So
empty.
it has to be,
Yeah.
at least one character.
Yeah, there should be something there. Let's prove to ourselves that this would not run the way that we want. So if we go at API/tasks, new. See how I'm getting this error from MongoDB? It's trying to cast this routing param right here, new, to an object ID. So that goes to show that it's actually running that first. Whereas if I were to move this guy up and save it again, now we're getting what we expected, right? We're getting back just this object that has some var in it. Any additional questions about how the ordering can sometimes be important? Does that make sense to you guys? Okay. All right, the final thing that I wanted to cover was just this idea of the req dot params, because I've seen this bite a few people, and it's definitely can be tricky. So I know we've talked about it briefly, but when do we want to be using the underscore ID?
We're using underscore right here. So right. It's when you're,
True, yeah. If I were to change this in here,
it's when you're referencing the model, right?
yeah. Well, yeah, so specifically when I'm getting some information from MongoDB, right? I've already obtained the task or whatever it is that I was looking for, and it has this underscore ID property on it, right? However, when we're talking about our routing params, what those routing params are called are going to be entirely at your control. So if I say here, I wanted this ID to be task ID, what do I need to change to make this work?
Params.task ID.
Yeah, inside what file though? Inside the controller, right? I would have to go back in here, and then I got get by ID down here. I'd have to say this is task ID. Oops. And then what would happen if I came in here and I said underscore ID like that? Probably. But what's causing that error there? So when I sent a request and I tried to view or get back a specific task, what would happen there?
It's probably trying to find it by ID. What the real ID
In your parameters, that's called underscore.
Yeah, so specifically, what is the value, according to how our routes are currently set up, what would be the value of req.params.underscore ID? Undefined. Because that particular property simply does not exist in req.params. Now, if I wanted it to exist, what I would have to do is I'd have to change it here to underscore ID. And then inside my task controller, this should work, right? So if I go back here to Postman, I think we got an, whoops. I don't know what any of my IDs are now, so let me just make a quick get request here. And let's try to get this specific ID. I'll just tack this on here. Okay. So now it actually works because I'm specifically calling it underscore ID in my routes. But that's the thing, is that the naming of this thing is going to depend on what you called it in your routes, not what it may be known as in MongoDB.
And what if,
Okay.
like, say we also create another, like, some MongoDB auto-generates ID, right?
Mhm.
And then we also create another parameters like ID. Then how do we do, like, dot ID underscore ID? Or
Well, in that case, so let's talk about this. So let's say you had added a separate ID to your MongoDB documents. Not recommended, by the way, but if you had done that, we wouldn't be using find by ID. We would use something like find one, because then find by ID only works for the native ID that MongoDB has. Okay, so we would use something like find one and then provide an object, and then we would say ID : whatever the ID was. But definitely stick to those Mongo. Yeah, stick to those Mongo IDs, and you can't go too wrong there. All right. Any other questions about Req Dot Params? What that is?
What if
Yes.
we have multiple layer of like wildcard? Say we have users /1/task/2.
Okay.
Are they all in the params object?
Yeah, you just need to make sure that you obviously don't name them the same thing.
Right.
So maybe if it was like, let's just say, for instance, the first wildcard was a user ID or something like that. Maybe call that one user ID, and then maybe if you were trying to get a task for that user, then you'd call it like task ID.
And there are
And then
both
you'd have access to both of them. Yeah, inside your callback function. Yep.
I want to ask you something about this one, back to the routing and the order.
Sure.
So this is more, say for what I'm understanding is like this is if we were to hit directly our route into the browser, right? Because every route is linked to something. For example, the post method. If we're trying to create something, then we hit the submit button, and then it hits that specific route. In that manner, does that still affect this? Like the routing still matters then? Like how we...
Well, of course, because so as we get into Angular, and some of you guys are already into it, we're going to be making requests to our server from our Angular application. So if we think that we're making a request to a specific method or an endpoint, but we're actually making that request to something else because maybe we made a mistake with our routing order, then obviously that's going to affect the application, right? It's not going to work the way that you're expecting it to work. So yeah, it could definitely make a difference for you. Anything else? Any points of confusion that you guys want to clear up before we break? Yes?
Kind of unrelated to this, but
Okay.
could you just quickly go over like put and delete? Are they just like offshoots of a post request? Because we kind of we were told they existed, but I didn't really understand it. Are they basically post requests in disguise? Just like they're
No.
only used for this?
No, it's a different method. Delete is a different method.
Okay.
Put is a different method. So delete obviously is when we want to remove some resource.
Right.
Put is if we want to update that resource.
But does
A
that
resource.
delete? Does that have that delete? That doesn't actually delete it, right? You have to have inside of your route something removing it, right?
Which we do. Yeah. So
But then what's the point?
what's the point of what?
What's the point of the delete if you have to delete it in your route
Tags.
regardless?
Well, the point is that we can use so every request has two things. It's got the actual URL, and then it's got the method, right? So we can use the method along with the URL to identify very easily what is it we're trying to do.
Okay.
Okay.
But that's not the only way to delete it, right?
Well, no, of course not. I could have a get route that then had some delete functionality to it.
What if you didn't have any delete functionality on your route that's linked to your delete? What would happen to it?
In other words, if I didn't even have this route at all, if I just commented it out like that.
No, if you have that, right?
Okay.
But what that's linking to, the dot delete,
Yeah.
the task controller dot delete,
Mhm.
if that doesn't have delete logic in it, what will happen?
It won't do.
Yeah.
Dirty,
Won't,
right?
simply won't delete.
Yeah, so then I'm just
So,
kind of
yeah.
curious as to like what that is doing. That delete.
And
It's
like-
basically identifying the request. Is what type of request are we making?
Is it for me to see though? Like, oh, like I know this route's going to delete. What's the point of it?
Yeah, essentially, in terms of your development, we're sort of making a contract here, right? In terms of RESTful APIs, we're saying that anytime we run some kind of a delete request, that means we're trying to remove some resource. Okay. Yes.
What does RESTful mean again?
Representational state transfer.
What is that?
It's stateless. The requests are stateless.
To go back real quick more, it's like on the get versus post, like I meant more like a post request, like there's a bunch of differences between get and post, like some can be bookmarked, can be cached, like one stores information over the URL, one passes the background, like all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
So like, do these
So
all have their brand new
get
rules,
requests, I
or-
believe, are the only ones that can be cached.
Okay,
Yeah, anything else.
so get is kind of by
Post is
itself,
not
and the
cannot be
rest of
cached.
these are like they behave similarly behind the scenes,
Right.
just different names.
Yeah.
Okay. That's kind of what I was getting at in the beginning when I was saying like they're all post, like the background stuff, like the way they function is similar to a post, right? Like it's just a naming convention, so we're telling other developers what we're doing with that route.
Right. So there are some differences too. Like with a GET request, we can't send JSON with that, for instance.
Right. But any of
Whereas
the
whereas
other
we
post
can
could.
with these other ones.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
We can't send you-
I guess what I'm really getting at is that all the rules stay the same for them. Beyond like it's a naming convention that you should adhere to, but like how they work is the same. But get is different. Get is a completely different.
Right. Right. GET definitely stands alone in that
Okay.
sense. Yeah. All right. You guys all square? Yeah, Tom.
Just a little bit unrelated to this, but I know that it sounds like there's some stuff Angular-wise that a lot of us haven't gotten to.
Yeah.
And my question is kind of around both how Express is set up, like how they have this, I forgot what this is called, modularization.
Modularization.
Okay. You know, which is great. I mean, I get that. I'm fine with that. You know, we have like, you know, the client, the server, and all that.
Okay.
And then over on the Angular side, when you create, you know, the project, you have public, and then you have dist and all that. I'm fine with that. As we move forward, is anything like that going to change? I mean, is there going to be like any other structure stuff?
Well, the main thing that will be different is that instead of having some kind of a client, a static folder or something like that,
Right. 'Cause
basically you're going to have a folder for your Angular project.
Okay.
And we'll route static requests to the compiled version of our Angular project
Okay. And
for all the front end stuff.
Okay, and that was kind of where I was going. I was a little bit fuzzy with. So the client stuff, and you know, I get that because I've been doing some of the Angular stuff. But should we still break out like the server stuff where you have like the routes.js over on the Express side? Or
Yeah,
or
for
should that-
sure.
Okay.
Stick to the modular structure.
Okay,
Because
that's where I was
it's
going.
it's gonna make all of that stuff way easier to reason about as you
Okay.
make a bigger application.
Because one of the smaller ones I was doing was just doing everything to server.js, and then I was thinking about this,
Right.
and you have it up here, and I was like, oh yeah, you know, I just wasn't sure if, since we're kind of losing the client stuff on this part, should we be losing the server too, or should we kind of follow this?
Yeah, and in there's one assignment in there, a Pokemon API assignment that you actually don't need a server for at all. Sometimes there's a
And that's
little
what
bit
I'm
of
working on now, and that's why this
Yeah.
kind of came up.
Yeah, sometimes there's a little bit of confusion on that. People think, well, I need to create my own backend, but actually, you're using their API as a backend,
Right.
so you don't need to create your own server stuff.
Right. Okay, and I think that's where the confusion started, because I wasn't sure. Since we were going out to their API, I kind of got it, but if there's anything moving forward where it's like,
Right.
oh, forget all the structure you guys just learned. Now you're doing this.
No, that structure will largely remain the same, again, aside from putting Angular in its own folder. in
Okay,
there.
okay,
Yeah.
great, thank you.
And then there's one other assignment too that's not going to require backend. That's the weather API one too. So
Okay,
if anyone's getting close to that or has gotten to it,
okay, great.
shouldn't need a backend for that.
So even with Angular, all static requests are still gonna hit server.js.
Well, with Angular, what we're going to do is in the server here, we're basically gonna route them to the dist folder of our Angular project. So Angular needs to compile all of our code into regular JS. So we're just gonna route our static stuff to whatever the compiled
But
folder
it's still
is.
gonna hit this, it would still hit this file, so to speak.
Yeah,
Still hit
absolutely.
this.
Yep.
Now, how does that differ in practice when you have a web server? Because usually with web server with static content, you're not gonna hit the application server, so to speak, right?
Right, yeah. So if we had these two things completely separated out, where we just had an API, the API wouldn't be handling any static requests at all. It'd simply be serving and receiving JSON stuff. That's it.
So this is a little bit not. This is a
Yeah, it's a
bit-
little bit different in the sense that we have what's called a quote monolithic application.
Yeah.
So an application that's doing both the front end and the back end.
Usually you want to split that.
Yeah, especially if it was like something really large.
I've got one more question, speaking of large. When we're submitting our stuff, what I've been doing, because I noticed like those files for
yes.
Angular are like 250 megabyte when I
Right.
create a new application.
Right.
So what I've just been doing is I've just been zipping the files I actually know that I've changed
Yep.
to upload them. Is that what we should do? Or do you guys really
Here's
want to
here's what you
upload?
can do, and I'll put these instructions in Mattermost too. You can delete the node modules folder in the root of the project. You can also delete the node modules folder inside the Angular folder.
In public, yeah.
And then there's another a dist folder inside your Angular project that you can delete as well.
Okay.
All of those things can easily be regenerated by us if we're looking at your code or something like that.
Okay. Yeah.
So if you delete those things, you'll be able to upload with no problem.
Okay, because I wasn't about to upload 250 megabyte.
It's-
per
Yeah,
minute.
don't even try. It won't
I
work.
wasn't. I
It's
just
still
wanted-
like difficult though, and because in order to do that, if you don't want to take that out of your project completely, if you duplicate it over and then delete the node modules portion, like still the duplication of the initial folder takes like 30 minutes. Like it's just so many files.
You can
to
use
copy over.
GitHub and just ignore those files.
Well, another possibility that you guys can do, and this might make the most sense, is you can delete the folders in your original application. So stop running it at first, right? Delete those folders, zip it, and upload it, and then later on you can regenerate if you ever need to. All you have to do is you just have to type in npm install, and it will reinstall all the node modules that you don't have anymore. Same thing, like we can easily rebuild Angular and gbuild, right? Just like we've been doing.
Yeah, couldn't you even just drag them to the recycle bin, zip it, and then just undelete?
That would store.
That might work, yeah. Yeah, good call. Try
So
that.
basically,
Yeah, sorry the workarounds are required. It's just because those folders get so large.
It's just
you know,
Angular. Like it's
Just
just
yeah, good old Angular.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how it is. But that's how to get around it. And I'll throw that up on Mattermost too, so you guys have it. Okay. All right. Cool. Thanks for hanging out with me.